Hello and welcome to MySecurityTV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. My name is Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor with MySecurity Media, and this is our Friday morning episode. Our guest today, Tuan Phan, who is in the Washington area in the USA. He's the partner with Zero Friction and representing ISACA today. We're going to be looking at auditing, artificial intelligence, and also I've added on that emerging technology. So we're coming from an auditor's perspective, but then this will also be a technology discussion on the convergence of technologies and then how they are interdependent and interrelated as well. And this follows off what we've been doing this week on AI and space robotics. So I'll bring that into the discussion as well. And let me bring on Tuan Phan, who is a partner with Zero Friction. I like that name. He's representing ISACA this morning, and we're going to be looking at auditing AI and also how we would approach auditing emerging technology. Tuan, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Chris. I appreciate being here.
Great, and appreciate your time as well. Whereabouts are you specifically?
So I'm in the Northern Virginia of the Eastern US. I'm about maybe 20 minutes from DC. You know, if I want to run to the White House, it's probably 30 minutes.
So if the president calls, you're about 20 minutes away. Beautiful.
Unless I run into traffic, you know, this area is just known for traffic. So.
All right. Well, look, and obviously you're representing ISACA. We might start with that in terms of your role with ISACA. And thank you to Karen for organising this one. We've done a number of sort of sessions with ISACA. I'm an ISACA member here in Sydney as well. And yeah, just your role with ISACA, and then we'll walk through some of the reports that you've been working on.
Yes, so I have been an ISACA member for a few years, and I'm actually sitting on the ISACA Emerging Technology Working Group. And as part of the working group, we looking at some of the prevailing trends, and we help ISACA build a preparation package to kind of educate our professional awareness around it. Like some of the most recent work that our team work on include like the AI fundamentals certification. So I was one of the lead trainers on that, and I conducted some class for ISACA on that. We look at Internet of Things as well. There's some prep material for that. And of course, blockchains. I'm also on the ISACA Blockchain Framework Development Committee, and we actually wrote the ISACA Framework Guidance Standard. And
did that come out this year? Was that this year or was that last year?
It came out in December last year.
Got it. Okay, late last year.
And you're probably thinking of the July edition, which is the technical auditing standard for blockchain, which I'm the primary author. That was released in August. Yes.
So how do you approach it? I suppose in that, because I find this is what I do for a job, and I find it hard to keep up. And yeah, how do you tend to approach keeping up with things and then moving to that next level of looking at how we would be auditing this type of technology? One of the questions might be, what are the key takeaways from some of the training? Is it methodology and principles, or how much? Yeah, and then how much do you actually need to know about the tech?
So my experience with the technology kind of a lot about focus when we prepare this preparation material is around the fundamental, perhaps think of it like a generic reference architecture of, say, a blockchain. There are so many of them, you know, they're probably just in terms of the top platform, we're looking at like 15 different platforms. That's probably more than most people can be technically proficient in auditing. So the way that ISACA approach in that scenario, we crafted a generic reference architecture that you can relate to. You know, almost every blockchain will have some kind of smart contract layer. They will have some kind of consensus layer, and then we break it down in that just language. And then you focus on some of the more common common issue that share across all platform. For example, you know, take a scenario of like Oracle, when a pricing Oracle is an issue It doesn't matter what blockchain platform you're on. If you're using a pricing oracle or some kind of a predictor, you are potentially at risk of having that oracle being manipulated.
Yeah.
You know what when I say oracle, I meant a prediction system, not the corporation
Yeah, yeah,
oracle.
yeah, yeah. But it's also, I suppose, it comes down to terminology and language as well, both as you approach it, so you understand what the system's language is, and then also when you report on it and sort of make your findings. Again, you've also got to get that language right. I take it that's probably the key skill as well.
That's correct. And one of the things that ISACA also formulated a set of or definitions. I forgot it's like a list of common language that have been used in the publication, and that have been harmonized across the three core blockchain publication, the pre-audit preparedness publication, and then the blockchain framework and guidance, and then the blockchain audit program. So they use the same common language.
Yep. And I take it you would be dealing with an audit team, so you wouldn't have an individual auditor necessarily going in on this. You would have a technologist alongside potentially, and it's also maybe the intention, the scope of the audit as well, whether it's from a third party, whether it's a certification audit, or and the like. I take it that is also
That's
a key element.
That's correct. I think it depends on the engagement of the audits, right? So if you have a scenario in which you are auditing a blockchain, a decentralized application, then you probably will likely to need some kind of a technologist who are versed in the smart contract language of that blockchain platform. So for example, if that was developed on, say, Ethereum, then you would need somebody who's familiar with Solidity, who can process that. You're not going to be able to bring in a Hyperledger Fabric guy who versed in Go and expect for him to figure that out in Solidity. Probably not the most efficient. Then the because the application also have potential backend into its own database, its own front end, you may have to have some general technologists who can help with some of that analysis as well. And of course, you have your traditional auditor who can look at the governance issue associated with it, along with any. It really depends on what the application trying to do.
That's creating quite a challenge, though, from, say, let's say the auditing firms. One is maintaining independence, because if particularly with emerging technology, and this is kind of where I want to take it as well, of an advanced technology, when it's so rapid, that pool of experts is pretty small in the scheme of things. So accessing those experts, and we'll call them experts for want of a better term. I don't think that could be another question, isn't it, in terms of who is an expert and how you define an expert in that. And then if it's, say, let's looking at AI, for example, or an AI process, it might be down to the person who potentially wrote that process as that person who might have the only insights into how it's actually working. Is there much difference? You mentioned blockchain, and I think maybe that is a little bit more advanced now and more mature. But AI is still coming through with new applications and some new processes. How are you finding the approach there, and even some of the scopes of some of the audits as well? Yeah, just your general observations at the moment around AI and auditing, if we can link the two.
So when I think so, when with regard to AI, the AI is just so that we have our terminologies on the same page. So when I think of AI, I'm thinking it's a science or the engineering behind making a computer behave as if it was a human. Now, behind
Versus
the
machine
scene,
learning, right? So,
right, and
yeah.
then the behind the AI, the engine that make the AI work is essentially is the machine learning, is the algorithms that drive all that. And within the realm of algorithms, we basically have generally three types. And you have the supervised learning, the unsupervised learning. The difference between the two is that the supervised learning, you have to provide the the different scenario for the machine to know which this is a dog and this is a cat, and enough of it so that it know how to discern the different through mathematics.
Yeah.
Now, in an unsupervised learning, the machine figured that out by itself. But unsupervised learning typically has some kind of utility or value evaluation engine on the back end, and that typically based on a deep learning module of some sort. This is where the complexity start. Now, in when take it a little bit one step further, when you think of how Tesla able to autopilot, use that as an extreme example. Now, that would require a network of many deep learning module focus on different tasks linked together into some kind of central module, and that central module made the best decision for the whole scenario that observed at that point in time.
Yeah.
So
now the question is, how do you audit that? Like, how do you if let's say it makes the wrong decision, and this is what we're going to be facing. Driverless cars is probably a good scenario, but Tesla's bringing in a Tesla bot as well. It's going to be in the household. If these bots start making the wrong decision, it's and I'm an investigator. I tend to deal with more an investigative process. Auditing slightly different, because you might be there to audit to improve, or to make findings and recommendations. How do you approach that? And we call it, let's say, the black box of AI, where it's too complex. That's why we're using computers to run these processes, because we can't do it.
Right. So I think one approach that one can take is you are not going to be able to look under the hood of the black box and discern um, the the if then else condition that render that result from that AI engine. It just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So because it's a probability outcome to some extent. Deep learning is probabilistic. It's not deterministic. So the best way to test a probabilistic machine is to test case scenario. So perhaps one scenario could be that you could subject the machine to different inputs that you expect to produce a known failed outcome, and you would tweak the input such a way that it on the verge of being, instead of being absolutely fail, it can be verge of partially fail, and to see how well that AI detect that. This is the same model that was done. I don't know if you're aware of the term GAN. They stand for Generative Adversarial Network, in which they pitch two AI system attacking each other. Not really attacking. One would generate, say, an image of, and then the other would discriminate it. And the point of these two combat is that they want to converge to a point in which either system cannot discern one and the other. So that is where is to be the threshold of the
almost stress testing each other.
Yes. So I think auditing AI would have to take that type of approach if you have a very highly complex neural network that comprises of multiple deep learning modules.
Now, what's the future of auditing in this realm? You just mentioned GAN, where we've got one computer basically stress testing another computer. There's no human in there anymore. Is auditing under threat potentially once we automate an auditing process? What's your thoughts? Or is this an exploding area that, from an auditor's perspective, this is going to keep us in business for quite a while?
I think auditor will always going to be around for a while.
Okay.
I mean, I think there are limitation to artificial intelligence. it cannot make it. It can make decision if the data set is large enough and known. But if the data set doesn't exist, it's not going to know. And I cannot just, I mean, there have been attempts for AI to create pictures, create images of people.
Yeah.
But it could not create that from scratch. It had to create that from a base of a large base of different images to kind of build it. So I think auditors should be focusing on how to upskill themselves to understand the technology. Um, I think the technology, AI technology, machine learning technology today is a lot more simpler to learn now than it were, say, 4 or 5 years ago. I can certainly tell you back in when I first started working on expert system back in the early 90s, it was hard.
Yeah.
It wasn't. We didn't have the stuff we have today. And I think when the second time that I worked on that type of system again was back in early 2000, and I can see the technology was clearly getting better. And most recently, back in say maybe 2016, I took a third attempt at it, and I come to a conclusion that it's definitely getting there. And now, I saw my kid like maybe maybe 2, 3 years ago. He was actually building a machine learning algorithm, just drag and drop using Microsoft.
Yeah, just the decision trees. Yeah.
Yeah, using Microsoft Machine Learning Studio. It's
Yeah.
literally just icon you drag and you drop. You want to validate split set, you just tell it, and it does everything for you. You don't
And
even have to know the stat behind it.
well, I think that's part of it, where you are using known science, I suppose, or I call it science, but let's say something like Microsoft or a known brand that would have gone through an element of testing and the like. And again, from an auditor's perspective, um, one of those one of the questions I have is what's some of the key trends around that auditing of this technology? What's the motivation of the audit or the general scope of it that you are finding? Is it we often think about sort of risk or finance or the controls around it. Do you find that you have to be much more focused in terms of scope for an audit of that type? Is there generally trends in the auditing approach to AI and emerging technology? If that makes sense, I know it's very broad, but what would be the kind of the top 3 to 5 types of audits that you would see in this technology?
So I think the in the broadest scope, it probably be when you are is the system is designed to do what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
You may have an AI intrusion, an AI based intrusion detection system, and it may, by design, it may have a false and an accuracy rate of say 99.99%. So there's a likelihood of 0.01% will pass through. So through testing, you should be able to qualify if that's accurate or not. uh, and you can get virus C to actually evaluate it in a sandbox.
Got
So
it.
I think accuracy and completeness is probably the most probably the most popular reason why AI system has to be evaluated or validated. Um, and I think the other thing is, depends on the use as well. So, if some AI system use in vision detection system for say pharmaceutical ampoule filling operation, drugs fillings, and they those need to be accurate because the drug product leveling particulates in within that may be depending on the design of that vision system. So I had a client that I actually worked with use vision system to look for particulates in an injectable. I mean, it's amazing
Right.
technologies, but then lighting make a difference. So when you do the testing or the evaluation, the auditor have to consider like the environmental factor. Um, the light, what happened if the light was shifted? Will we still
It's
produce
different.
a similar behavior or something different?
Yeah.
So we actually look at your scenario as well.
And what about lifting the hood to sometimes on this technology as well? Do you find that there's restrictions, let's say from the producer, manufacturer, or whoever's creating it, the creator, um, in terms of the understanding how that AI, because most of it will be quite legally protected, IP related, or potentially not even fully known or understood. Do you find that there's often restrictions and maybe advice on how sometimes you can get around that?
First, the for the supervisory system, I think you can generally look under the hood of your system because
Yeah.
the data sets are large enough, the algorithm are relatively well known. I think where it's a challenge is the unsupervisory, because the unsupervisory will likely depending on some kind of neural net design, and that based on layers and layers of design, you just even the top expert in the AI field uh, don't really know how it really behave
Yeah.
deep, multi-level deep. We as human, we don't think like that. We maybe the best chess player thinks like that.
Yeah.
Kasparov, maybe he think hundred. I don't know how deep he think, but in chess, maybe 100 moves ahead. I really don't know. But normal people just don't think at that level, so it's very difficult to kind of assess what under the hood for like unsupervisory system.
But is that not a part of the advice you might give? Let's say from a corporate enterprise, they're bringing on a new tool. It's well, there's two. There's one is the claim of using AI and machine learning, and we hear a lot of vendors throw those terms around that we're using AI, and are they really using advanced AI, or is it simplistic? I take it that's one approach. Prior to a purchase, you might look for audit reports or seek to do an audit yourself of that technology. And then the other one is if they're sort of developing it themselves. I take it that's that internal audit process understanding. Is that generally how you would imagine it? That third party coming in versus the internal auditor who is auditing and again, it comes back to language, I take it.
So from my approach when I do an audit of an AI platform is that I want to make sure that the client is using a mainstream platform. Why is that important?
Yeah.
Because AI technologies has evolved to the point where it is somewhat a predictable science. If you are building your own AI platform today, I would raise a concern with that, because why do you have to do that unless you have something unusually unique? But generally, you can just go buy an AI platform or rented it either through Google. Google have TensorFlow AI. I think Amazon have AI services.
Yeah.
You can go to Watson Studio. IBM has Watson
Yeah.
Studio. So
Facebook, you got Facebook's AI, you got Newton, a whole
it's
range of them, right?
yeah. It would be very unusual if the client have a generic AI application that have no unique competitive advantage, but yet they want to build their own AI platform. I
Well,
would be concerned with that.
okay, red flag. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other one is maybe any auditing software out there and how advanced you're finding the auditing software in itself, particularly using, say, algorithms and machine learning in its own right, and almost we're seeing it a bit more in the cybersecurity side of the real-time reporting. You really almost want real-time auditing these days as well, right?
So if you're referring to, say, scanning solution to look for like vulnerabilities, and I
Or
would expect
anomalies, yeah.
that, yeah, I would expect that in an AI application or solution, you should be able to scan it using traditional vulnerability software to determine if it has design weaknesses and things like that. I think the point that we were trying to kind of highlight is that the the traditional scanning software are not going to find issue in the design of the application in terms of how it functions. That is where the skill of the auditor have to comes in. That's what he brings to the table. His ability to kind of discern the statistic, the design, and craft a mechanism to evaluate if that application is doing what it's supposed to do. I think that's the key piece.
Now, one of the things is, let's talk about other emerging technologies and your observations around that, and then we might bring it back to auditing rapidly emerging technology. I mentioned space robotics and the like. We're seeing a lot in vision and audio analytics as well, and different applications. It's more the application as well is also expanding and changing rather than the core tech. What's your key observations? You're working on, ISACA is working on an AI related report. A white paper should be out by the end of November. I'm looking at the Pulse Emerging Technology 2021 report here. What's your main observations around these reports and that emerging technology? What are the sort of standouts for you?
So with regard to the Pulse report, one of the things that I gather is that if you look at the top three, the most popular category are considered to be the most important emerging, that's cloud computing, AI, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. What these three things have in common is hardware and computing power. And if you step back, maybe go back in time, there's an explosion of this roughly around 10 years ago, and that's when we're able to actually get better graphic out, better hardware, better CPUs, and to do this sort of things. So I think that an auditor, when it comes to auditing this domain, those three domains, you probably have to, it would imply that you have to have a certain level of technical know-how in the domain.
Yeah.
So you should have a good basis around perhaps programming, because you're going to need that. Statistic is fundamentally important, because when you evaluate a large complex system, you're not going to be able to test singular outcome. You have to test in a probabilistic approach. You have to look at an average or standard deviation. What is the variance of that outcome? So Internet of Things are work very similarly, because it's like a neural network. It's like a network. It propagates. So you cannot really test one device to another. Perhaps you test them through a network. It's just like
well, a bit like the sample testing as well. Do you find that we talked about the sort of the rise of the applications, the diversity of applications as well? It's not really possible to audit them, or one piece of technology might be applied across so many different industries as well. Do you find it's becoming a bit more centralized auditing, in terms of you might sort of raise it so crosses different industries as well in terms of that tech? Where I suppose where I'm coming from is a bit that those centralized reports or auditing reports, more like driving higher levels of certification. Is it good for things like standards and the like, where they get certified to a standard? And again, that alleviates a need from an auditor's perspective to check that out, if that's where I'm coming from, in terms of, because of the diversity of the applications, they need to, it's going to force the market to meet standards. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to pass various different audits and approaches.
Yeah, I think the most auditor will prefer a more specific audit scope. I don't think they would. I don't. I think it's risky to use a broad scope type evaluation for this type of system. Because you cannot focus on every aspect of it. Like, for example, when we audit a blockchain application that use a pricing oracle, we may have to scope the pricing oracle out of because the pricing oracle may belong to another vendor, another provider, and we may have to scope that piece out of our analysis. But we know that it's related, and there's some potential risk there. We have to consider it, but. So I don't think you're going to see the emergence of this broad scope type audit. will always be, if anything, it will potentially be more specific.
Well, and the other one is, would you find that that will force the market to meet standards and certifications through that process, rather than this rapid release of some technology to the market just for speed of getting to the market? That might be fine to get to the market, but ultimately they're not going to be passing audits because they don't meet certain requirements, and they will ultimately get blocked. So it's better for the market to be releasing technology that follows certain standards. And how are you finding the level of standards keeping up as well?
So when it comes to, say, emerging technology adopting a standard, that is hard to do, because if they are an emerging technology, they're probably not likely to have a standard exist yet. So I think that would be one challenge. But as those technology approaches some kind of equilibrium or mainstream, then through some consortium, yes, the standard help. Like one of the things that I belong to the Wall Street Blockchain Security Alliance, and one of the things we talk about is, when it comes to trade finance in the blockchain, there is no standard right now. It's whatever the two bank agree what that is. They just create that. And it would be nice if there's a standard that allow for us to kind of build application kind of like that. But unfortunately, it doesn't exist. So some consortium have to come together and create that standard and try to push it out to be adopted.
And I think it's a good example, isn't it, where the technology is being adopted, deployed, but the standards are still coming up behind. Again, it's a bit of a learning curve as well, and exactly that's what I'm looking for. There was I mean, most of us will be familiar with an emerging technology curve. Do you want to talk us through the process, or the general pattern of emerging technology in terms of its release, adoption, and the like, and where sort of AI currently is? It's certainly maturing, but it's gone through that maturity model.
Yeah, so I did. So if you recall, so the way that I view that model is, it's kind of like the Gartner hype model. It looks
Thank
like
you.
come up like a curve and then it dips. So I think in the beginning they call it the technology trigger, and then they call them the peak of inflated expectations, and then it went down to a trough of disillusionment, and then it slowly come back to enlighten, and then it become mainstream, and then
Got it.
and
Thank
at
you.
some point,
That's exactly what I was thinking.
right. So I actually did some works around this, and what I went back and looked at around 5 years of Gartner hype analysis, and I grouped them by different product that they have looked at. And for us, for artificial intelligence, we should be in the slope of enlightenment currently.
Got it.
So the technology is at a mature enough level, and they have enough utility proven out there, that there's no reason that it go to the next level, which is productivity. It's just a matter of building on it and find more and more use case to apply it.
And it's also the interdependence of these. You mentioned cloud, AI, and IoT. They all come together now. You will have an IoT device that has maybe edge computing, but also connected to a cloud environment. And that's really the key difference now, isn't it, as we move into the 2020s, and 5G and 6G. Maybe I'll touch on 6G. Are you hearing much on 6G and how the explosion there might also change?
I think the 6G is still a little bit further out, Chris, to be honest with you.
End of the decade?
I would say so. There's a study actually was recently released by Nokia, and I just happen to be a big Nokia fan.
Nice.
I'm not here to pitch Nokia, but I just happen to be a big Nokia fan. And if I recall in the study, they anticipate that we still have at least 3 to 5 more years in the 5Gs, and then there will be a few more years after that then we start seeing a move towards 6G's adoption. So we're looking at a time horizons roughly between 8 and 10 years out. So.
Got it. Well, look, thanks so much. I just found it was Ron Quaranta, Chairman and Chief
Ron,
Executive Officer of
yes.
Wall Street Blockchain Alliance, and Dustin Brewer, the Principal Futurist with ISACA. I take it you work with these two gents?
Yes, they both on the blockchain, the ISACA blockchain's framework and guidance document. Yes,
That's right. And that was our opening 2021 episode. There you go. So it was released late last year. The ISACA blockchain framework and guidance, and we actually kicked off this year with Ron and Dustin as
that's
well.
wonderful.
So that was good. So hence having you on is a nice, almost close to I don't know if we'll be able to squeeze one in before the end of the year with ISACA, but Tuan Phan, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Let's leave the audience guessing or looking out for the AI report or white paper. What's this covering? How much can you disclose? Because we missed the timing on this, the timing between interviewing you and there's an AI report or white paper coming out from ISACA.
So I believe the paper is scheduled to due the latter part of this year. I mean, I'm not actively on that committee, so I don't know the content of it. But what I could do is I can at least share with you my prediction where I believe the AI will going in the next 3 years. I mean, I first of all, I don't know if you're aware of this, Chris, but last night in San Francisco, the robo taxis are here.
Beautiful. So, how many? Just one?
Cruise. No. Cruise Origin is a startup. They've been working on automated robotic taxis, and last night they commercially released it, and the founder took it for a ride along with a bunch of his executive presidents, and they just dialed it up, and it showed up with no drivers, and it take you to where you need to go. It's amazing.
And what's their operating model there? Is it just within the San Francisco CBD there? They have a defined,
so
sort of up Union Street, that's up and down?
Yes. So right now, I think they are restricted to be within a certain city radius. There's a requirement for them. So they bounded by that. But I think the beauty is that, it's the technology, when it comes to driving technology, we already at level 4. But the level 5 is the ultimate, which are fully autonomous. It's already here. It's just a matter of getting the regulation in place to allow us to use it broadly across the US. I mean, the Tesla, it's they probably already operating at level 5, but they haven't been able to.
Because of the regulation. I think that's another key one in terms of your predictions, maybe for the next few years. We do find government quite slow, and then even then they don't necessarily get it right in terms of that regulation. And you talked about sort of driverless taxis being commercialized in San Francisco. Last time I was there, I had a coffee made by a robot there in the street. So they've still got them there as well, the coffee arm, the robot arms.
Oh yeah, there's a pizza, there's a robotic pizza that make pizza, and George Mason University near my home here, it have robotic delivery system, food delivery system for the student in the dorm. They have that for almost 2 years now. So,
and what do you find is that regulatory limitation on it? Is it things like road traffic acts and the way our roads working? Is there any consumer safety restrictions on some of this as well?
I think one of the challenge, the constraint for why it haven't been adopted mainstream is the regulator they need the right people to help them to shape the language, to understand the technology. If you look at some of the tests, Tesla have almost 5 years of operating history now, and if you look at some of their safety report that have been released, they actually safer than driving having a Tesla is safer to drive than compare that to a traditional internal combustion engine. So the data is already there. It
Yeah.
just just finding the right language to be crafted into the language and to adopt it.
And you mentioned statistics before and standard deviation. It takes time to build up that data or those data
That's
sets. Into particularly
yeah,
safety is one. Modes of operation and safety. We need that time frames as well. What about in sort of virtual environments? And I mentioned we ran is it synthetic data, sort of learning in virtual environments as well. And we've seen Facebook move to Meta now,
mhm.
and Zuckerberg's going down on that sort of avatar and 3D environments as well. Maybe do you see auditing requirements in virtual reality?
I think it's very probable. I think the technologies is already been used in different way. Like for example, architects can design houses, and you can literally use an Oculus and see how your house being laid out before actually see the house being built.
Yeah,
So the technologies has been there already. Yes, there are some risks associated with it if the technology were to be adopted in, say, a larger scale. Let's say that, hypothetically, let's say that there's a metaverse, like a metaverse is like a conversion between social applications, hardware technologies. Blockchain is going to be enabled as part of it for payments and NFTs, or they're going to weave all that in somewhere. And so I believe that at some point the auditing is important, because now you have people could potentially be impacted by it.
yeah.
Somebody
Well, the other
could
one would be
act.
the things like digital twins, where the auditor doesn't have to necessarily go on site. If it's a physical audit, you can audit a digital twin of a physical environment. I do security auditing, so you would imagine
Yep,
that's one where you don't necessarily have to be on site. And I think that's where the pandemic has changed
yep.
expectations of being on site. You've observed that in the US as well.
Yes, do we like a lot of my audit work I can done remote. I can perform that remotely. A lot of the blockchains audits that I do can be done on, basically I can do that on the live chain, because the data is transparent.
Yeah,
Uh, the the only stuff that you have to be on site tend to be the proprietary design of the client. They may have their proprietary software, and they want to look at the code. You have to go there and look at their code. They won't send it to you.
yeah.
You have so
And there's not much on-prem sort of computing these days, or it's reducing, and you've got the cloud. So if it's a cloud-based
yeah.
system, other than the actual looking at the device itself in operation, if it's the cloud network, then you don't need to be on site. There is no site.
Only when something breaks, then you do
And
have
then
to
you got to
go
go
on
to where it
site.
was. Okay, there you go.
Until
And now I
something.
think that's an interesting point. Is it's also that post-incident review
Yeah,
and the auditing of what went wrong, I suppose, or
yeah.
sort of again. Do you find that that's also a good line of business to be in on when things will break in as emerging technology comes through, understanding what went wrong?
That's I think the forensic side of things
Yeah,
will always have a need.
yeah,
There's always a demand for that, depending on the technology and the applications of it. One of the biggest emerging market right now is around blockchain forensic of cryptocurrency,
right.
because they are being used. I don't know about Australia, but I know it's been used in Europe. You can do retail trade with cryptocurrency, and there are segment of the population are using it illicitly for different purpose.
Yeah.
And you need expertise that able to forensic and analyze it. We need that, because it only bring more legitimacy to the cryptocurrency. The lack of it then it would make it an issue with the regulators.
Well, there we go.
So the,
That's a whole new subject as well. The forensics around this as well, and forensic auditing is another big area. But I think it's one of those things we've covered that hour almost pretty easily. and I don't think there's still some things we probably even haven't touched on. It's still a bit early over here for our Western listeners as well, and it's getting late there for you as well. But so thank you so much for that. That was very interesting discussion on auditing AI and emerging technology. And we were joined by Tuan Phan, who's the partner with Zero Friction LLC, and he's also colleagues with the blockchain framework and guidance with ISACA. And ISACA is coming out with an AI related. Is it a white paper or a report? I think
it's a white paper. Yes,
yeah,
it's a white paper, and it framed the AI fundamental certifications.
Great. And now this covers off, I think last year there was an auditing AI. There I do have a audit and assurance. This looks like a framework with ISACA, potential impact of artificial intelligence on organisations and why should auditors care about AI, and some of the mapping COVID strategy as well is in there. Then there's also the Pulse emerging technology 2021 is also well worth having a look at, and that's covering everything from AI, AR, VR, XR, all the way down to wearables, robotics, and quantum computing. Quantum, okay, there you go. We haven't touched on quantum, but that's a whole new level as well. That's I take it that would be your takeaway. Quantum would be one that's slightly beyond where we're currently at, but by 2025, I imagine it's going to be a little bit more advanced.
Yes. I would say maybe close to 2030 is my predictions. I think quantum is one of the biggest constraints for quantum is cost. I mean, individual, unless you're a very wealthy individual, you just don't have that kind of capitalization to go and buy your own quantum machine.
So that's the new frontier. That'll be the next frontier, a quantum computing environment. And again, even from that auditing perspective. So definitely, if you're an auditor or an ISACA member, I think you're in the right business. I don't think you're going out of business too soon. So Tuan, thank you so much for that. And apologies on the time difference today. And also a little bit of confusion. We were a little bit late on why my planned release felt going live. So thank you, Tuan. I do appreciate your time.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure. We'll have you back. Cheers.